Hi, this is Gordon Hisayasu, and I'm talking about the second part of the human brain. It's always been amazing to me how we have been so creative as humans, and we've taken the inanimate matter and the elements that God has given us, and been able to make cars and houses and spaceships and everything else, even computers. And what we've done with computers is we've created this worldwide internet. And the worldwide internet has been called the most complex technical system built by man. And God has hum, taken living tissues and cells, and He's created a brain. The internet has about 25 billion interacting devices. This ordinary human brain that we all have and carry around us have about 10 million times those interactions. And it's made by God using living tissues and cells as opposed to, our little astonishing creations. What is this brain that God made us? It's about, have you gone to a store and bought 3 pounds of hamburger? Well, we're about 3 pounds. That's the weight of a human brain. And it's so much active and so energetic. It uses about 20% of the total oxygen in blood that we have. And this blood supply is supplied by over 100,000 miles of blood vessels. We have about 85 billion neurons, and they're about 600 miles long. The humanity has harnessed electricity or electrons and made a whole bunch of amazing technical things using electricity, like the light bulb initially, and essentially radios and TV and everything else, including the computer, of course. What God has done is He has harnessed our neurons, and He's used that to give us consciousness and mental capabilities. There are about 100 trillion connections of these neurons, and they perform about 100,000 chemical reactions per second. And this happens at the synapse. I used to study the biochemistry of the synapse, which is fascinating and complex. Another one of those complex diagrams I talked about before, like photosynthesis. And it takes place with these neurotransmitters and these receptors, and they speed things along with electrochemical impulses at about 250 miles per hour. And this is very fascinating. It makes the man's attempt at trying to, do the things that God has done in our brain. We can't even come close to doing these kind of things. And the other thing that's a little troublesome is that science really has not done very much in terms of explaining the human brain in terms of its evolution. The brain is of soft tissue, so we don't have very good fossils or any fossils probably. But we don't have a missing link in the mind, and we don't have like bird reptiles with feathers, or a jawbone that gets better and better, or the ability to stand upright. All of these things that we have, the human brain and the superiority of the human brain is pretty much a big mystery to science. They have, through genetic studies, discovered that there are certain genes that code the development of the cerebral cortex, which is our, what we call the higher cognitive abilities, or the higher cognitive functions of the mind, like consciousness. And they use that kind of to say that, this evolution of the brain is through the genetics. From a scientific point of view and a religious point of view, that's pretty apropos, because genetics really is the design that God has made for everything, for all organs, for all functions of our body. The human body is totally controlled in every way by genetics, and so is the parts of a flower or the parts of any other animal. So evolution and genetics really are tied together, and I believe that also, as a scientist and as a Christian. When I was younger, I used to wonder a lot about the mind and the brain, and it was kind of always just mystery and amazement. I used to look at the psychologist and the psychiatrist who was always trying to explain behaviors and attitudes that we have, and even trying to understand what cognition is. The problem is that when we tried to understand that, we really had very little keys I'm 73 years old. That was a long time ago. But the physiology was very not worked out at all. And I used to wonder, how can we see? How can we comprehend what we see? How can we create and design things, inventively design things? And how can we love and hate and dream and imagine and have curiosity and especially memory? I always like to identify myself by my memories. And I also know that we can discern and reason because of this brain. And so where science has done this so-called gene mapping, they can tell you, well, this is where your sight centers are, and this is where your touch centers are, and your smell centers, and et cetera, et cetera. They know where things happen in the brain just by their brain mapping, but they are not even close to understanding how the brain works. And the idea that I get from the Bible is that the Bible gives me an idea of why. God designed our brains to give us the ability, the higher intellect, to compel us to seek and to receive God. They have found this thing called so-called God spots in our brain, and they said, well, this is the spots that they identified to help us have beliefs. Not necessarily beliefs in God, but beliefs in general. And the Bible really tells us that human wisdom leads to foolishness, and understanding comes from the Holy Spirit. And so, yeah, we have these spots that help us believe, and I believe that's part of God's gift to us, to have these so-called God spots. But it really does take the Bible and to help us to understand, and it takes the Holy Spirit to give us this revelation and this inspiration to believe. And so if you put it in the perspective that I do, is that science helps me a lot, and that's what this talk is about. It helps me a lot to believe reasonably in God. But it's the Bible that guides us to our way to salvation. I look at man as being very blessed from the intellect from God that he gave us, by the intellect that God gave us. But life is really hard. We have this consciousness or conscience that really makes us feel guilty and sinful. And in the Bible, it talks about how the Holy Spirit can help us, guide us through these temptations. Once we accept God, we have a change of heart. And the wonder of our brain is that we can receive God through grace and salvation. And it is basically, we need a brain to have faith. Thank you.